Welcome back to the Methane Pavilion. My name is Jonathan Banks. I'm the International Director with the Clean Air Task Force, and we're joined this afternoon with Laurent Michel from the Ministry of Ecological Transition, which is a strange name for a ministry that also is in charge of climate change in France, correct?
Yes, our ministry is in charge of both environment, transportation, housing, and energy, and above all, and among all, climate change.
That's fantastic. Well, it's France was one of the early supporters of the global methane pledge, and the support from France has been really important to raise awareness of this issue. And in fact, President Macron spoke about methane emissions in this spring at the climate summit that President Biden put on online. Why is methane important to France?
In fact, methane is important to our common target, which is reducing of greenhouse gas emissions and fighting against climate change and limiting the rise of temperatures. And in fact, now I think we are more and more aware that methane perhaps is less known than CO2, but it's very important. It has a strong GHG power. Of course, it has a shorter life, but everybody which looks at the figures has seen that now methane, for instance, it seems that I'm not specialist, but globally methane accounts for 1/3 of what today's rise of temperature is. It's 0.5 degrees due to methane, and so globally in the world and in many countries, methane accounts for quite a huge amount of the equivalent CO2 emissions. So that's important. We can tackle the emissions, for instance, in the oil and gas sectors, but also in other sectors and activities. So that's why I think a commitment on methane is important.
That's great. That's great. Yes, it's an extremely powerful climate pollutant, but there's a tremendous opportunity in reducing it to see benefits to the climate in the very near term, which is why we're all here to try to raise awareness of that. The European Commission is supposed to be issuing draft legislation in December of this year, and this is time in that where France will be president of the Commission. Where do you see France making a priority to get that methane legislation pushed through the Parliament? Do you see that being a priority for the French administration during that time?
Yes, it will be with a big amount of priorities, since we are now, as you know, discussing all the Fit for 55 package, all legislations in order to implement our common target in Europe. I think that, usually speaking, when you receive a new legislative proposal, we will spend some meetings and first weeks to exchange on it, understand it, and probably we will not be able in our presidency to deliver a global general orientation final conclusions, but the more we'll be able to do with this new text to make it progress for the comprehension of member states and towards compromise, and the next presidency could go further. And above that, I would just like to repeat that globally at European level or in other countries, since we have a global target for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we will have to consider methane with or without this legislation.
Yes.
So it's already in our scope, and with this proposal of the Commission, we will have a concrete tool to go further.
Yeah, it gives you the opportunity to really focus on, especially the energy sources of methane emissions in Europe. And Frans Timmermans has spoken also about the need to try to address methane emissions from the sources of energy that are brought into the European Union. Which will obviously be a big thing to try to address as these policy actions move forward. France is also seen as a global leader on climate in general. Do you see a role for France to play in this space around the global methane pledge, in working with countries around the world, either through finance or technical expertise or science or anything else? Do you see a role for France to play in the broader space around the world on this issue?
Yes, of course, I think we have to cooperate, but first, I think our first answer would be that we have to do our part. And in France, compared to other countries, our methane emissions do not come mainly from oil and gas sector, since we are not a producer. Of course, we monitor very closely the emissions of the gas transportation, for instance, but we want to now tackle our methane emissions, which are at 65% or a little more enteric fermentation in agriculture, in farming, and the other coming from waste management mainly. So we have to do that, and for instance, we intend to make a 22% reduction from 2015 to 2030 in this sector. So first we must do our part. Otherwise, it's important that all countries in the initiative I think we have now more than 100 countries joining this, which is very interesting. Can exchange on best practices, on technologies. We can think of including in our finance to development and climate change, which is managed in France, for instance, by the French Agency for Development, AFD, which is very well known, I think, that when relevant, we can help to projects tackling methane emissions. And also there have been some discussions and around technologies, for instance, for following through satellite images. I think just before you had the site Kairos, I think, which was there. So we can also be part of the scientific and technical exchanges. So I think there's much space, broad space for France and for other countries to exchange and collaborate financially, technically, and of course on report and implementation.
Yes, it's very important to have that element of verification that we're achieving something here.
Yes.
And as you pointed out, Kairos was just here talking, which is a French company, talking about their work to be the eye in the sky and to see what's happening around the world on methane emissions. And it's really exciting to see the progress that's moving, even beyond the work that they're doing, but to the next generation where we'll be able to see emissions from around the world. Do you see any specific areas in the methane space? There's agriculture and waste and oil and gas and coal mine. Do you see any of those areas as being key places where you'd like to focus in France?
So in France, as I perhaps explained a little too fast, our emissions from oil and gas sectors are very small, since we have no drilling and activities. But for instance, we monitor our transportation and distribution network. On a regulatory basis, the transportation network has to be entirely supervised every 10 years, and distribution network every 4 years. So we really want to go further, even if it's a small share. Regarding the two other big emission sectors in France, regarding agriculture, it's included in our national low carbon strategy, having also a roadmap for reducing emissions of agriculture. And regarding livestock, we are, for instance, in the recovery plan, we had some help to some investments, for instance, for methanization or for captation of methane methanization. And also we encourage, through what is called in France the label bas carbone, low carbon label, which are methods who are able to identify projects leading to less emissions, and which can be helped financially by people who want to compensate their emissions on voluntary basis. And we have now new methods for improving and reducing emissions agriculture, and even in livestock with changing of food and of regime for the livestock. And the second issue we address is waste treatment sector. Already some regulation is in place in order to make captation of the gas coming out from the landfills. It's compulsory, but we want to improve it, and so now want to convert this gas. Not usually some 10, 15 years ago it was burnt, so it was better to have CO2 than CH4.
Yes.
But now it's burnt with electricity valorization, cogeneration, or now it's it's evaporated and injected in the natural gas network, so that we have in fact biogas in the network, so diminishing the carbon content. So, and we want to improve that on landfills and also on sewage treatment stations, so that we can also diminish the methane emissions and also make valorization of it. So we really want to tackle our two big emitter sectors, agriculture and waste treatment. And also in 2023, in the management of household wastes, sorting of bio-waste will be compulsory.
Fantastic.
And it's a little difficult to implement, especially in big cities, but now it's coming. It will make so less waste in landfills, less leakages of CH4. Even if you want to capture it, you have leakages. So less leakages, and afterwards you can make value of it with compost or methanization. So really we want to address also this question of sorting of bio-waste, which is an important issue. And of course, even before it's systemic question, reducing the level of bio-waste produced, for instance, for food wastage. So it's...
That's really exciting to hear.
Yeah, it's exciting. But since we have nearly 10% of our national emissions coming from methane, because agriculture is 20% and a little more than half is methane. It's important that in order to match our 2030 targets and the target of carbon neutrality, if you don't reduce methane enough, in 2050, it becomes a big amount of our national residual emissions. It probably, if we have livestock, we'll still have emissions, but we have to follow paths to reduce that, because all these residual emissions have to be compensated through the carbon sink, which is not as huge as that. So methane is a target. Even if you don't have a huge oil and gas sector, methane is important for countries as France, and we are very glad also to see that big countries concerned by the oil and gas sectors are very now dedicated to reduce the emissions, and the specialists, which I'm not, told me that it could be, if the target of the coalition initiative is met, it can give us 0.2 Celsius degree less. So it's
that's a big deal.
At global level, it's important.
Yes. Well, I'm really interested in the organics diversion program that you're talking about, and the mandatory organics diversion program, because I don't think everybody understands that that when you're talking about landfills and waste methane, that one of the biggest things we can do is to stop sending organics to the landfill, because that's what creates the methane, and it's getting those kinds of programs where we treat waste differently that can prevent that methane from ever happening. We still have to deal with the landfills that we have and get the methane out of them, but what we really need to start doing is dealing with that waste side of things and preventing those organics from going there. So it's really exciting to hear that about France's progress on that, and it sounds like France could be a real leader globally in working with other countries around the world to develop the same kind of policies. And I think that's one of the opportunities here with the Global Methane Pledge, is to take these kind of leadership examples where countries like France can lead on waste and other countries can lead on their efforts on oil and gas, and that can be a way that this can lead to spreading these best practices around the world, so that we can all see this reduction of 0.2 degrees. So that's really exciting. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you're a very busy man here at the COP, and we really do appreciate you stopping by the Methane Pavilion, and thank you very much.
Thank you, and I wish you all the best for the coming days and for the coming years in this huge target. Thank you.